characteristics of culture. And some of what we talk about might kind of get your brain turning in terms of things you might want to look at along your field trip, perhaps. We've already talked about elements of the cultural landscape. Remember we talked about color? How, for example, if you're in a Chinatown, the color red is a characteristic color. That's a part of the cultural landscape. Or if you go to a Greek restaurant, there's that light blue color, right? That is appropriate for that ethnic food that you would get there. So here's some other things you might want to consider possibly for your field trip about culture. We know that culture is learned human behavior, correct? That's the most broadest definition that encapsulates what culture really is. You're not born with culture, it's learned. And primarily, you learn it through language, which is why language is so important. It's how we impart culture to others. Now, that is kind of a simple way of thinking about culture, isn't it? Learned human behavior is so broad. So in the next few weeks in these little mini lectures we're going to start to tease out all the details of culture, about religion, for example, across history, languages, etc. Another way to think about culture is it's non-genetic information. So if you have offspring, right, you pass on your genetic information to your offspring, right? But culture is not genetic, okay? It's not inherent, right? You're not born knowing how to speak French. You're not born knowing how to practice Buddhism, right? That's all learned behavior. So we're going to look at some specific characteristics of culture then today. More time on the slide? All right. Number one, culture is constructed. And what do I mean by constructed? Does that mean, oh, it's like built like a building? Not necessarily. What I mean by constructed is it's something that we all construct on our own. We all create in some ways. And we do it consciously. Right, that goes back to the definition, it's learned human behavior. So if you are in a specific culture, let's take our kind of LA millennial culture, student culture that we're in this academic setting. The way you do things is kind of seen like it's just the way things are. For example, the fact that many people wear jeans, okay? Everyone wears jeans. Kind of a part of our modern academic culture, right? It's kind of seemed like jeans are totally appropriate, right? It's just the way things are. Lots of people wear jeans, and it's no big deal. Whereas if you were transported into a different culture, right, that might seem very strange, right? Wearing jeans might seem inappropriate, perhaps. One good example of this is the difference between check writing or paying with your debit card, right? How many of you have ever been at, AM, PM, and you get behind that person who's writing a check for their Fritos, and you're like, really? For reals? I have to sit here while you write a check? Okay? Because our culture has shifted, hasn't it? We're in a plastic culture now, right? So you're used to just, that person in front of me is going to swipe their debit card, and you're going to be on your way. So if someone, reaches out of their pocketbook and dusts off the cobwebs on a checkbook, it doesn't seem culturally appropriate. Because this is just the way things are, and this is just the way things were, right? 25, 30 years ago, if you were in the grocery store, everyone was probably paying by check. And that seemed totally normal and natural, okay? So you can see how we kind of create culture is constructed. The other, number two, important component of culture is that it all depends on your worldview and perception. What does that mean? How many of you wear prescriptive lenses, either contact lenses or glasses? Okay, about half of you. And for those of you who don't wear prescriptive lenses, have you ever tried on someone's glasses that weren't meant for you? Okay, and what did that do? What did that make change in your vision? It makes it worse. It makes things blurry. Because that's not your prescription, right? When you put on someone else's prescription, the world looks weird. The world looks fuzzy. Culture is the same way. We all learn a culture. And all of our cultures is different. So we each have a cultural worldview, if you will, which is a pair of glasses that's fine-tuned for our culture. It's fine-tuned for the way that we see the world through our religion, through our language, and through our customs, correct? That's why you can have two individuals from different cultural backgrounds look at the same issue. Let's say the issue is abortion, right? And two people coming from two worldviews can look at the same issue, but come up with very different conclusions, can't they? Right? Because they're wearing a different perspective, right? They're wearing a different lens. And to each of them, their way looks right. Correct? Because they're wearing their certain cultural worldview. But if you were to put on their glasses, that would cloud your view. So what this means is how we perceive the world, our worldview, is often really more important than the reality of the world. And what I mean by this is, if you think that the U.S., for example, is the biggest, greatest, most important country of the world, and you're not really worried about the rest of the world, that's the way you think the world really is. Now, that's not the truth, right? There are other continents that are larger, perhaps. But if that's the way that you think, if that's your worldview, that's your reality. It's often much more important than the world really is, and we'll give you tangible examples of this. Third, the third main component of culture is that it's always changing, which makes culture so cool. Okay? It's not stagnant at all. And any of you who are plugged into pop culture, you know this, right? Pop culture is always changing. Who the hottest rap artist is always changing, right? What the latest fashion trend is always changing. It's really hard to put your finger on the pulse of culture. Okay? Culture is always changing, and it always evolves. And here's a good example. We're kind of living in a time right now where we're moving from this, where we have like a person who's like beeping your food through, okay, at the supermarket, to this. When you show up and you're like, I have to do it myself, and it's like, this item is wrong, right? You have to put it back. And we're living in a very interesting time because we're kind of in between these two worlds, right? A lot of people kind of aren't quite ready to jump into this computer automated checkout. So we're almost a little more into this personal checkout. How many of you have ever shopped at Fresh and Easy? Okay, and you know that I think at Fresh and Easy, it's all automated, right? They have like a helper person. But if you're going to go to Fresh and Easy, you have to be comfortable with this, okay? Some people don't shop at Fresh and Easy because they're not comfortable with that. I want to show you a brief video clip from a comic who really makes fun of culture. And in this clip, he's making fun of this cultural change of the self-checkout.